In the world of sub $10,000 watches, in the 2020s, Tudor has solidified itself as one of the top players alongside brands like Omega, providing incredibly innovative and high-quality watches at affordable price points that give collectors an access point to the world of luxury watches without breaking the bank. But this story didn't happen overnight. We're going to explore the Tudor brand through the guise of a beautiful 1960s Tudor Submariner that I think speaks to a lot of what makes Tudor such an important brand today, but also what made the brand so significant in years past. In 1905, Hans Wilsdorf founded Rolex, and Rolex quickly became one of the leading watch industry brands, creating tool watches capable of weathering the most grueling of conditions as waterproof cases, automatic winding movements, and other key innovations were introduced by Rolex throughout its storied history. In a modern context, obviously Rolex is one of the most important brands, if not the crowning jewel of the watch industry, and everybody knows all that they have done and contributed to the watch industry. But Hans Wilsdorf had broader aspirations than just the Rolex brand. At his core, he wasn't really a watchmaker. He was more of a successful businessman who had vision for how you create the best watches for as many collectors as possible. And Wilsdorf's goal in the 1920s was to extend the dependability, reliability, and robustness of Rolex watches to a broader customer base. That's why in 1926, Hans Wilsdorf decided to extend the Rolex key innovations to the new Tudor brand with more affordable movements packaged inside, which brought many of the elements that made Rolex watches significant to a much broader audience. In the mid-1940s, Wilsdorf brought the Oyster case, which was the waterproofing system that Rolex was known for, to the Tudor collections. And then in the 1950s, we also saw the evolution of the Oyster Prince, which added automatic winding, another key innovation that Rolex was known for. This allowed Wilsdorf to reach a much broader audience while still allowing collectors to access many of the key innovations that made Rolex so successful throughout the first half of the 20th century. And so what we started to see were that many of the key elements of Rolex watches were getting broadened in reach to collectors at different types of price points. And that's why Rolex and Tudor are sort of regarded as definitive tool watch brands during this period. We didn't really look at Rolex as a luxury brand in the same sense. It was definitely a higher end tool, but it was considered a tool nonetheless. And Tudor was sort of the utilitarian alternative that provided much of the same elements that Rolex was known for, but just available in a more mass-produced and easier to manufacture package for Wilsdorf. And this is sort of capturing the brilliance of Hans Wilsdorf as a marketer and as a businessman, that he was able to nail down key innovations that made Rolex successful and then sort of harvest that significance and that reputation to extend his reach to more customers than ever before. And that's why both Rolex and Tudor are regarded as so important in the modern context. And now we're going to sort of take a look at what I consider to be a case study of what Rolex did so well with the Tudor brand. And that's through the guise of this 1960s Tudor Submariner, which I think captures a lot of what made Tudor so successful in this period. What you'll notice is that Tudor and Rolex had a material and case sharing program during this period, which was sort of the goal of Wilsdorf, that we take all the components that we were already producing for Rolex and then just place slightly more affordable movements within. And so when we look at this Tudor Submariner, what you'll notice are many of the case components that we find on Rolex watches. For example, the crown is signed with the Rolex crown insignia on it. The case back says Rolex Oyster on the back, cased by Rolex. You'll notice that we have a Rolex signed bracelet with the clasp also signed Rolex, and you can see again the crown insignia. What you'll start to pick up on is the fact that many of these elements, or the entire exterior of this watch, is essentially the same as a Rolex. And yet, this watch was significantly more affordable upon release, and that's really about the guts within the watch, which were, as we said, a more mass-produced movement within. And when we look at this watch on the dial side, we also start to see many of the details that collectors go crazy over in this period of Rolex collecting. We have a beautifully ghosted bezel, which turns this gray color over time with the patina that age has exposed it to. And we have a gilt dial, another detail that we see on valuable Rolex watches from this period. Beautifully patinaed indexes throughout. The Rolex Mercedes handset, that's incredibly famous on watches up until this day. We also have pointed crown guards, a detail that is especially valuable on vintage Rolex models. And so what you start to see are many of the details that collectors get incredibly excited about on vintage Rolex models. But if we were trying to find a Rolex with some of these details from this period, the model would trade at a multiple of what Tudors trade at. And I think that it's really cool that we get something with equal significance and historical provenance, but at a fraction of the price point. And these are also substantially rarer when you find them in this type of condition. I mean, you can see here that we have all the case hallmarks from when this model was originally produced, with the beautiful polished facets on the sides of the case, and also, perhaps my favorite detail, a riveted case bracelet. And so what you can see are these sort of rivets on the side, and these bracelets are incredibly comfortable because they're soft and supple on the wrist. If you're looking for an excellent entry point to the world of vintage that gives you so much of what makes watches from this era so collectible, but at a fraction of the cost, I think it's really hard to beat a Tudor Submariner from the 1960s. This watch has everything that I think makes Tudor so important, and I think that it also reminds us why Tudor today is such an important brand to the watch industry. We'll see you next time.